Hey everyone, today we're going to learn something new in our unit on probability, and that is sample space. Now, the sample space is the set of all possible outcomes of one or more event. So, we've been talking about total possible outcomes for a couple days now, and how we found the total possible outcomes is we simply counted up the total possibilities that could happen when we performed an experiment or of an event. But the sample space is the same thing, but now we're going to be looking at the total possible outcomes of one or more events. So, not just like flipping a coin, but maybe now flipping a coin and spinning a spinner. Okay, we're going to have a bunch of different examples. Now, this can get to be a lot. So, there is a neat and organized way that we can represent the sample space or the list of all possible events. And we do that with something called a tree diagram. Now, a tree diagram is a visual way to see the total possible outcomes of two or more events. So, you wouldn't make a tree diagram just to see all the possible outcomes of flipping a coin. That's only one event, one experiment. We wouldn't draw a tree diagram on that. We only use tree diagrams when we have two or more events. So, for example, like I said before, flipping a coin and spinning that spinner. All right, so we're going to look at a bunch of examples together. So, this first question says, you randomly choose a crust and a style of pizza. Find the sample space. Okay, so over here we have two different types of crusts. We have a thin crust and a stuffed crust. Then we have different styles of pizza. We can have Hawaiian, Mexican, pepperoni, or veggie. Okay, so what we want to do here is we want to list all the possibilities for different combinations of pizzas we can make. So we can have like a thin crust with a Hawaiian, thin crust with Mexican style, thin crust with pepperoni, thin crust with veggie, and so on and so forth. As I said before, this can be a lot. There could be a lot of possibilities. So the tree diagram allows us to represent all these possibilities in an organized way. Now, I set up these tree diagrams for us today, and all we're going to do is fill in these little text boxes with our possibilities. Okay, so the first event here would be choosing a type of crust. Now, we have two types of crust. We have thin crust and stuffed crust, which is why in this first column here we have two boxes. For these two boxes, we are going to write in the different type of crusts. So for the first box, we have a thin crust. Whoops, that's our first option. And then for our second option for a type of crust, we have a stuffed crust. So I'm going to write stuffed crust in that text box. Okay, but now let's say we pick a thin crust. After picking the thin crust, we have to pick a type of style. Now we have four different options for a type of style, which is why we have four different boxes here. So let's say I choose thin crust, but then I can choose a Hawaiian style. So in that next box, I'm going to write Hawaiian. So one possibility I have here is thin crust with a Hawaiian style. We simply follow that arrow. The boxes that are connected by this arrow, that represents one possibility. So thin crust Hawaiian is one possibility. But let's say I want to do thin crust with Mexicans, with a Mexican style. Thin crust in Mexican is a second possibility. Let's say I want to do pepperoni. Thin crust with pepperoni is another type of outcome. Or we can do thin crust with veggie. That is another possible outcome. So far, guys, just by looking at the thin crust, we have four different possibilities. I can do thin crust with Hawaiian, I can do thin crust with Mexican, I can do thin crust with pepperoni, or I can do thin crust with veggie. But we're not done because we have another type of crust style. Let's say I didn't want thin crust. Let's say I wanted stuffed crust. Well, I can pick stuffed crust with any types of these styles. So I'm going to go ahead and fill in these boxes. So let's say I pick stuffed crust, but now I want Hawaiian style. So stuffed crust with Hawaiian style is another outcome. Let's say I want stuffed crust with a Mexican style. Stuffed crust with Mexican is another possible outcome. Or I can do stuffed crust with pepperoni. Stuffed crust with pepperoni is another outcome. And last but not least, I can do stuffed crust with a veggie style. So that's another possible outcome. All right, guys, so all of these boxes here represent your possible outcomes. So again, you just follow these arrows and that's going to show you all your different possible outcomes. Now, let's go through and list all of our possible outcomes. Again, we're going to start with our first box here and we're going to follow the arrow. So I first can have a thin crust, follow that arrow with a Hawaiian style. So thin crust, Hawaiian. Okay, next possibility, I could do thin crust with Mexican. Thin crust with a Mexican style is another possible outcome. Now follow your third arrow. Thin crust with pepperoni is another option, and thin crust with veggie is another outcome. Okay, so now we're done with the thin crust. Those are all of our possibilities if we chose a thin crust. Now let's go to a stuffed crust. I could do stuffed crust with Hawaiian, or I can do a stuffed crust with a Mexican style. I follow that next arrow, a stuffed crust with pepperoni, and a stuffed crust with a veggie. Okay, boys and girls, so these are all of our different possible outcomes of these two different events. And the first event was the type of crust. The next event was the style. Okay, so this is the list of all of our possible outcomes for these two events. This is our sample space. Now, there's a lot of different options here, which is why this is kind of hard just to think about off the top of your head, which is why the tree diagram allows us to list all of our possible outcomes in a very neat and organized way. Okay, so part B here says, how many, I'm just going to move this over for a second. How many possible outcomes are there? Okay, well, there's two different ways that we can answer this question. One way is to simply count up all of our possible outcomes here. So that's one possible outcome, that's another, so on and so forth. So I can simply count this up in this box over here, or I can count up this final section of our tree diagram, boys and girls. Whatever your last section is, all the way to the right, if you count up all those boxes, that will also give you your total possible outcomes. Okay, so if I count all these up, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. There are 8 different possible outcomes in this sample space. Okay, and I know that because if I counted up all these options here, I would get 8 as well. All right. Now there's another way you can do that. If you didn't want to count, and I'm going to move this out of the way, we have something called a fundamental counting principle, which sounds really fancy and crazy, but all it tells us to do is simply multiply. We multiply each event. So our first event was the type of crusts. Well, I had 2 types of crust. My second event was the style of pizza. I have 4 different styles. All I can simply multiply 4 times 2 to get 8. And that will give me, again, my total possible outcomes, which was 8 different pizzas available. Okay, so you can either multiply your 2 different totals of events, so in this case 2 times 4 to get your total, or you can count them out in your tree diagram. All right, sometimes I'll ask you, hey, just tell me the total possible outcomes, and then what I would do is simply multiply. But other times I'll ask you to list all your possible outcomes like we did over here. Then you would have to write this all out and construct your tree diagram. Okay, all right, let's do another example together. Number 2. Okay, says find the sample space of spinning spinner A, here's spinner A, and spinner B. So again, boys and girls, I have 2 different events. My first event is spinning spinner A, and my second event is spinning spinner B. So what this means is, for the first time, I'm going to spin spinner A. It's going to land on one of these numbers. Now, for spinner A, I have 5 different sections, so I have 5 possible outcomes. When I spin it, I can either land on the 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. So for my first event, I'm going to type those numbers in, type in all my possibilities. I have 1, 2, I can land on 3, I can land on 4, or I can land on 5. That takes care of the first section of my tree diagram. Okay, now my next event would be spinning spinner B. I have 3 sections in spinner B, which is why you will see 3 arrows and 3 text boxes. Because after I spin spinner A, let's say I landed on 1, I'm then going to spin spinner B and I'm going to land on either of these 3 colors. Okay, so let's say I spin spinner 1 and I land on the number 1. Now I'm going to go and spin spinner B. I have, again, 3 options. I can either land on yellow, I can land on red, or I can land on brown. So I'm going to type in those possibilities in my text box. So let's say I spin spinner 1 and I land on yellow. Okay, then I can spin spinner 1 and land on red. Or I can spin spinner 1 and land on brown. Okay, so this is my first set of possible outcomes. I can land on section 1 and a yellow. I can land on section 1 and land on red, or I can land on section 1 and land on a brown. Okay, guys, again, we follow these arrows. Whatever 2 boxes those arrows are connecting is a possibility here. It's one type of outcome. So one type of outcome would be section 1 and yellow, or section 1 and red. Again, we just follow these arrows. Okay. On spinner 1, though, I can land on a 2 maybe. So if after I landed on the 2, now I would go to my spinner B and I can land on a yellow, or I can land on a red, or I can land on a brown. Okay, so now I have 3 more possible outcomes. I can land on a 2 and a yellow, I can land on a 2 and a red, or I can land on a 2 and a brown. Okay, not done yet. Because if I spin spinner A, I can land on a 3. I can land on a 3 and then come to spinner B, and I can land on any of these 3 colors. So again, I can spin a 3 and then land on a yellow, or I can spin a 3 and land on a red, or I can land on a 3 and then spin a brown. Okay, now we got 3 more possibilities in there. 3 in yellow, 3 in red, or 3 in brown. Okay, not done yet. I can land on section 4 in spinner A. After I land on section 4, I would then come to spinner B. Again, I have 3 possibilities. I can land on a yellow, I can land on a red, or I can land on a brown. Okay, 3 more options. Still not done. Last but not least, for spinner A, I could also land on the section 5. After I land on section 5, I come to spinner B and I spin this spinner. Again, I have 3 options for spinner B. I can land on a yellow, I can land on a red, or I can land on a brown. Okay, so these are all of my different outcomes, boys and girls. Look, I can land on a 5 in a brown, a 5 in a red, a 5 in a yellow, a 4 in a brown, a 4 in a red, a 4 in a yellow, so on and so forth. So we're going to list all of our possibilities here. I'm going to start up top. Again, guys, we look at those arrows. Whatever 2 boxes those arrows are connecting is our possibility or type of outcome. So I can land on a 1 and a yellow. I can land on a 1 and a red. I can land on a 1 and a brown. Again, I simply just followed my arrows. Now I go to 2. I can land on a 2 and a yellow. I can land on a 2 and a red. I can land on a 2 and a brown. Okay, done with the 2s. Now I'm up to 3. I can land on a 3 and a yellow. I can land on a 3 and a red. Or I can land on a 3 and a brown. Okay, I'm going to come up here. Keep going. Now I'm up to 4. I can land on a 4 and a yellow. I can land on a 4 and a red. I can land on a 4 and a brown. Keep on going. Now I'm up to 5. I can land on a 5 and a yellow. Okay, I can land on a 5 and a red. And last but not least, I can land on a 5 and a brown. Okay, boys and girls, so these are all my different possibilities of those two events, spinning spinner A and then spinning spinner B. Okay, so if we look at part B now, it says, how many total possible outcomes are there? Again, for this question, you have two options. You can simply count up your total possibilities or count up how many sections are in this part of the tree diagram. That'll give you your total possible outcomes. So we can simply count these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. So I counted up 15 possible outcomes. Let's say you didn't want to count. You can use that fundamental counting principle, which is simply multiplying. So how we do that is we would look at our first event, which was spinner A. Count how many total possible outcomes we have here. Since there are 5 sections in the spinner, we have 5 possible outcomes there. And then I would multiply how many possible outcomes I have in my second event, which is spinning spinner B. Since there are 3 sections in spinner B, I have 3 possibilities or 3 possible outcomes in spinner B. So I would multiply 5 times 3, to get 15. As you can see, I got 15 possible outcomes when I multiplied, and I got 15 possible, can't spell today, whoopsies. I got 15 possible outcomes when I multiplied and 15 possible outcomes when I simply counted them all up. So you guys can do either method. Does not matter. You will get the same answer. Okay? All right. What I'm going to have you all do now is answer question 3 and question 4. I set up, if we look at question 3, I set up the tree diagrams for you. Okay, so question 3 says the popcorn stand offers buttered or unbuttered popcorn in 3 sizes, small, medium, and large. Find the sample space. So you guys are finding all your different possible outcomes for getting a type of popcorn and a size. So I set up the first section of the tree diagram for you, buttered and unbuttered. If you choose buttered, what are the sizes you're going to choose? If you choose unbuttered, again, what are the sizes you're going to choose? In this box over here, you're going to list all possible outcomes, right, just like we did. Right? Then you're going to come to part B and just answer how many total possible outcomes are there. Again, you can simply count, or you can use the fundamental counting principle and simply multiply how many types of popcorns you have by how many sizes you have. You will get the same result. Okay? Then for number 5, a little bit different. I set up the tree diagram for you, but I did not fill in any of the text boxes. So for this one, we're talking about ice cream flavors and toppings. Just notice, guys, you have 2 ice cream flavors and 2 boxes in this first section. So obviously your ice cream flavors would go here, and then your types of toppings would go over here. As always, you're going to then tell me how many total possible outcomes you have, and then you are going to list all possible outcomes in this box as well. All right. Again, guys, if you have any questions, please do not hesitate to ask. I know this is kind of confusing. It's a lot, but we're going to spend a couple days on it. So take your time, try your best, and please email me or comment on this assignment if you have any questions. Again, I'm pushing this out as a Google Slides. You guys will each have a copy of this. So just make sure once you filled in all these text boxes to turn it in when you are done, and I will check it over. Okay, guys, and also just be careful when you are you're texting in the text boxes that you don't shift one of the text boxes, because it could get kind of messy if you do that. All right, guys, again, any questions, please do not hesitate to ask. Enjoy.